as we think about this as a recording studio and we're creating videos to get out to the world, I think people understanding what AR and learning, AR and education can mean, and we have a great group. Why don't we go down, people introduce themselves.
Hey there, I'm Tyler. I'm really passionate about technology and education. My background, I used to teach high school, and then I went and did a graduate degree, and now I work as a consultant for education companies developing AR, VR learning experiences. And I'm also really excited about the idea of visualization with VR and AR. I developed just recently with Google a really awesome VR experience inside of a human cell that I'd love to show anyone who wants to see it.
And where did you get that degree, and what was it in?
I got a degree in biochemistry from MIT, which is how I first met this guy.
Yeah.
Great. I'm Cindy Ball. I'm the program manager for Oculus. I'm focused on understanding how VR can have a unique impact on learning and try to get a little bit more data-driven information to help us understand what it's really good at and what it may not be as good at.
Hi, I'm John Katzman. I have founded a series of education companies and run them, Princeton Review and then 2U, and have a studio now called the Noodle Companies, creating a bunch of education startups. And I think a lot about the barriers in education that will make it difficult, but that are surmountable for AR and VR to have real impact. And so I'm approaching this more as a practitioner, looking at how do we enter this space successfully.
Great, thank you guys. So let me start out with two examples, selfies and Google Hangouts. I say selfies because my kids take a lot of selfies. And they're not millennials, but millennials, if you do the math, take selfies about an hour a week, 52 hours a year, and if you do the full math, that's 27,500 selfies they'll take. So that means they're using a camera to look at themselves. And I think with Pokemon Go, you can debate whether or not it's AR. I think the next generation, which my kids are, I don't know what they've called it yet, if you say Generation Z, does that mean there's not a generation after them or something, or AA? So are they going to use technology to look out? And I think AR is not about closing yourself in a VR world, but it's seeing the physical world and getting digital information. And I wonder, the habit of taking selfies, what does that mean about the habit of being a lifelong learner with technology? And then my other question about Google Hangout, you're looking at a 2D screen, and all of us have done some sort of telepresence, whether it's Skype or something, and it's not the same as having someone 3D there with you. But I think AR, people could be rendered so they collaborate and you really feel like they're in the room when they're not. And what does that mean for learning together, group learning, interaction? So just go down, what does this make you think of these two examples?
Right, so really quickly, I think I'll respond to what you said about selfies and so forth. For me, AR is exciting because if used well, it mirrors, we can use it to show the cognitive process that we want to impart when we teach, right? If I've done my job as a science teacher well, when a student looks at a piece of wood, they don't just see wood, but they think about the molecules, the atoms that make it up. If a physics teacher has done their job well, when a student sees two objects falling, they're thinking about all of the other information about Newton's laws of motion and so forth, right? Education, in large part, is mapping other cognitive information onto the natural world. And what excites me about AR is how we can thoughtfully model that, right? Using applications and so forth, where we're showing this extra layer of information as students look at things, as they experience the world, as they interact with it. And so I guess that's sort of an address, but also a dodge of the point that you made, but mapping another reality onto the physical world is all about what I think learning and good education is all about.
So I think people are going to continue to look through their cameras. They're going to do it for entertainment, and where we can have a valuable learning experience, they will use it for that. Again, I come back to the point of understanding where are those valuable scenarios to have AR overlaying and make sure it's being used appropriately. I will disagree with you a little bit about saying, we don't want to be closed off. I think that there are definitely some scenarios where being closed off is truly a benefit. Again, it's a balance between, based on what the user learning experience is, to decide whether you want to be enclosed or open. And then the discussion around social engagement and collaboration, again, it's very early days. But the Facebook Spaces, if you haven't had a chance to try that on the Rift, it really is. You have a cartoony avatar of one of your friends who might be across the country, but they're standing right next to you, and you really feel that presence. And you are able to, in these early days, have some very rudimentary collaborations where you can draw together and share things and take pictures. But it's so early, but I think that's actually going to be very compelling. It may never be quite the same as the face-to-face, but I think it's going to be an important and evolving way to interact.
So there are a couple starting points that you just might want to think about. The cost of the equipment for AR and VR is low and coming down. A course here at NYU is $5,000. A degree, obviously much more expensive than that. The hardware part of this equation is not the issue. It's the software part. You can commission someone to write a book for $50,000, a good book, a good author. The average video game costs $25 million now. The average movie costs $100 million. The costs of creating that content, the tools, get more powerful and cheaper every year. But the average cost of producing the material goes up because the level of competition goes up. So when we think about, kind of the penetration of this stuff, we have to be thinking about the creation of high quality stuff that's going to continue to evolve, and figure out the kind of business model behind it. And we've got to figure out real problems that have to be solved. High school kids and K-12 kids are already in a room. We don't need to virtualize it. More and more college students are online. At this point, the huge majority are taking at least a course online, and 30% of professional master's students are now completely online, and that number is going up by 15% a year. So we'll have more graduate students than not studying completely online in the next 5 years. So it could be that it's the classroom itself being virtualized that matter. I think it's not. I think it is about the content that is for a class, for something when you're studying, and then the reinforcement of skills and content once you leave the class, where AR in particular is going to be transformative.
So today, if you want to learn something out of a classroom, your first instinct may be to go to YouTube and see a video, or it may be watch a Khan Academy. How does AR change that, especially with these with stereo, where you can see 3D objects? Some people call them holograms. Technically, they're not holograms. But if you can see something 3D, like walk through a heart of a human being, or open up the parts of a device that you can't afford to have in front of you, how can that accelerate learning and make it more real and connect with people who have real passion to try to understand something?
Carefully, I think. I'm sure that we've all been in that situation where we're at an art museum and we're at a science museum or something, and there's a group of school kids, right? And exposure to all of these different ways of visualizing things is always seen as good. And they're playing freeze tag by the Degas. Or they're running and pressing every single button in a science museum exhibit, right? And it's like they're affecting interesting things to look at. Oh, this is so cool, this is so cool, this is so cool. But sometimes there's not always a sense that there's much learning taking place just because you're seeing these cool things. So I think it's really important to realize the tremendous potential, right, that AR has in putting 3D models in front of you. You can look around, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, and that totally gets me excited. I think it's also important that we couple that with meaningful questions about how do either in-person instructors engage students in this, how do we build interactivity into these applications so that students are asked to complete particular tasks. They have to go on quests that along the way will teach them fundamental skills and concepts as they get acquainted with these things that they're looking at. And so I think all that stuff that you mentioned is awesome. that this technology, this functionality is there and that it's growing, but just the technology itself, right, isn't going to teach anybody anything. And so it's important to think carefully about the learning experiences we construct around, around this stuff that is really going to be what's transformative.
I mean, I would agree with that. As we have web VR and VR experiences or AR experiences become more accessible over time, again, we can't let it become a novelty. We want to make sure that we do really understand why are you using that technology to make that point, to tell that story. The technology will not replace a great instructor. It will be supplementary, and finding those nuggets of content that really can be much more impactful using this technology is what we need to focus on, understand.
Let me give you a couple examples where I think it's not a novelty. You're a new parent, and you're taking care of your kid. And the kinds of things you would learn, maybe not in formal education, but that you would need to learn about taking care of a kid and the cognitive development of your kid in the first 2 years, which is critical. Having something prompting you, seeing a rash over here and saying this is a problem, that's not a problem, coaching you that here's a game to play right now when prompted. There are ways of giving just-in-time education through AR that are transformatively great, either in the absence of a formal class or in afterwards as reinforcing key lessons. And I see AR less as an alternative to any sort of asynchronous or synchronous instruction, and more a replacement for homework and all sorts of things afterwards.
So any parent who has a young child knows that they're combating with them over screen time. Is what's going to happen when AR becomes more mainstream? So that's one. Two, I've heard people say, "Oh, why do we memorize things anymore? You can just Google it." Does AR change, how some of that stuff? These are sort of pedagogy questions. And then lastly, where's the scale opportunities, John? You probably have a lot of thoughts on this. What's going to get disrupted? Who's going to lose? As these things become more, the new normal. So take any of those, anyone.
Scale. So I guess one of your questions was around, let's go scale. So again, I think somebody made a point earlier today that the devices we have in our hands that are with us all the time, those are going to be the devices we turn to. So I think that...
I've heard it called a new limb.
Your new limb, your digital limb. So I think that will be where the scale will be. They'll be in everyone's pockets. And as we are waiting for the hardware to evolve, maybe for some of the less mobile alternatives right now, we're waiting for them to be a little less expensive, lighter, all the things that we want to move them into more of a mainstream market. That'll take a little while yet. That's why we're putting some devices, some of the tether devices into libraries, and I know other people are working on initiatives to get this out into the public spaces where more people can try it. But I think, yeah, your mobile device in your pocket is going to be the scale for a long time.
So imagine a pyramid, and the bottom of the pyramid is the textbook, right? That market, textbooks, K-12 and higher ed, may be $40 billion globally. Above that, in the day, were lectures, somebody talking. And then above that, the top of the pyramid is discussion. The flipped model classroom replaced the lecture with asynchronous materials. At first, just a video, and everybody realized who wants to watch a video of some guy for an hour or two, and people creating good asynchronous materials took that and made it modular, interactive, rich media, adaptive, collaborative. And the textbook companies, although they're very slow to the game, are starting to realize that they're about to just lose their market entirely. And they're taking their materials and making them rich media, adaptive, collaborative, interactive. And the lines between those bottom two pieces of the pyramid are disappearing. There's just asynchronous materials and then discussion. That discussion could happen in a classroom or it could happen online. So the global market for content isn't just replacing the $40 billion of textbook spend. It is the entire 2 tiers of that pyramid. And so there's a lot of scale to be had here.
So John asked with AR, why will we memorize anything anymore, or should we? I'm sure a lot of you took high school biology, and I'm sure you've all forgotten what the Krebs cycle is, right? If we all had some sort of AR device, we could pull up immediately a definition of the Krebs cycle, right? We'd find out that it's a 6-intermediate biochemical pathway involved with the oxidation of carbon-containing compounds to carbon dioxide and water. Great, the information is there, and that means absolutely nothing to pretty much everyone in the room. Right, so I think just the access to information is only the first step. And unless we've learned how to contextualize that, it's not of great use. Now, AR gets me really excited when we can go beyond just this access of information, and we can access maybe experiences, visualizations, diagrams that are targeted to our level of information, our level of knowledge where we currently are. And we can begin to map those experiences on the real world. Now, here is the Krebs cycle, and here's how the Krebs cycle is functioning in this individual that I see in the audience, and now I can see it within his body. Now we're talking about not even worrying about not memorizing anymore, because we're learning this information in a completely new way, right? It's the difference between learning a new city for the first time, right? When you moved to New York, you didn't make flashcards of where the A train went. And so saying, oh, we have, we could pull up information about the A train stops on a device, that's great. But even better is just intuitively learning where the A train stops, because it's what you've experienced what we call situational learning, where you've been out there experiencing something and just learn it the way we learn best as people. So that's that step beyond even, we don't even have to worry about memorizing. We don't even have to worry about access to this factual information, because AR can allow us to leapfrog that and have situational learning experiences that teach us deeply what's actually going on in the world around us.
So, did you want to answer?
Yeah. The thing about everybody talking about the next generation of learning is that we talk about it in exactly the modality of the last generation of learning, right? It's a bunch of people sitting on a dais or on a stage talking at you. So let me just throw this out. If anybody wants to go first, what's a piece of knowledge or what's a skill that you learned in K-12 school or at a university? And then the question for you guys as practitioners is, how would we transform that using technology? So rather, and don't look for something that would be particularly easy to do. In fact, feel free to look for something that would be really hard to do. But I think this is the sort of thing where we're playing with it is going to be a lot more instructive than just telling you that it's doable. Writing well. At what grade level? Like learning how to write at the beginning, or you're saying as a high school or college student?
Being able to write at a level that can be published in journals. I would that I'd say in 80s and 11th grade. I mean, at that level.
Okay. And a lot of students learn it later than that. Did everybody hear the question, the concept? So that's a really hard one. So let's think on it for a second. The question is, how would we use AR to reinforce better writing, to be, in effect, a coach sitting on your shoulder as you're writing, giving you tips about your process, giving you tips about what you're trying to do in a way that would be useful, not in the classroom necessarily, but now when you're going out and doing the hard work?
Well, so for me, I'm a real nerd. And so for me, a big part of me learning how to write well, and maybe this may or not be your experience, but this is my experience, was I didn't become a good writer until I really understood grammar. and I understood what was what and where the clauses were and this sort of thing. And so just based on what my big stumbling block was, I can imagine having some sort of an AR setup that's doing language processing, and as I write a sentence or something, is showing me this is the clause that refers to this, and breaking down a sentence into different parts and showing me the relations between different clauses and subjects in the same sentence. That probably would have been one small piece of what would have been useful for me. Maybe yes or no for you. That's just the first thing I thought of.
So let me take this in another direction. I was talking to someone, the chief product officer of Netflix, about AR, and he said, well, there's some people that do entertainment content where you lean back and you consume it, and there's others who do content and there's a way you interact with it where you lean into it. And I think AR is one of those where you lean into it and you can be interactive. I wonder, with AI coming down the pike, if figuring out a way that we can still be creative and still have fun being creative and facilitating creativity, that's going to be a challenge, and there's a threat to that, because writing an essay or there's so much that AI is going to assist. And maybe I'm kind of jumping into the future, and this is like kind of singularity stuff, but I'm curious if people have thoughts on that.
I mean, I think we are just naturally creative beings, and so I'm not actually too worried right now about AI taking away human creativity. I think if anything, as we get these kind of additional tools and can really empower people to have different types of creative superpowers that they can bring, I think we'll see more creativity and not less in the short term.
I agree with that, but I want to come back a little bit. Circle
Sure,
back to this. That if you were coaching your kid, and she's a senior in high school, and you had a lot of free time, and so you just happen to be sitting next to her as she's writing a paper, and you're looking over her shoulder, and you have access to the thing she's typing, and she's trying to write, and she's not an incompetent writer. You're saying write well, so take medium level skill and raise your game. And you're coaching her to make an outline, you're coaching her, looking at that outline, analyzing it. There are all kinds of AI-based tools at this point to analyze an essay once it's been written. What if you had those tools real time? And you're just sitting there going, that outline is crap. Like, let's talk about that outline because it's not thought through. And you're struggling writing the first paragraph. Why don't you start with the second paragraph? And the kinds of things that you would pick up in today's tools to analyze writing, if you were using them as she wrote, what would you be telling her if you were a great writing coach? And I would argue that we can do that pretty effectively in her field of view as she's writing.
Yeah, I think it actually comes before your writing, comes to organize.
Yeah. A lot of it is in the outline. A lot of it is in the structuring of what you're going to write.
Yeah. Is this on? I don't think so. Really? Okay. And that's throwing out writing at an academic level is maybe bad for AR because AR is very visual. But I think, for instance, some people learn things when they're reading them. Some people learn things when they're being told them. Some people learn things when they're reciting out loud the instructions that were written. And I've encountered this with a friend of mine who told me to read the instructions for setting up a video recorder. And I said, well, why don't you just read them? And she said, no. If I read them, I won't understand them. If you read them to me, I can understand them. So that's an example of how learning can be really, really different for different people. I'm really good at reading manuals, but something like AR and being able to have, it's AR with a lot of AI actually, being able to have
Computer vision.
And computer vision is a lot of it. Having someone else, having an avatar that's playing the role of someone who's patiently listening to the 16th edition of your
essay and then giving you feedback could be empowering in a way that that we won't probably provide a human to do. So, I mean, that would be my answer
So-
to.
So you guys, last question, lifelong learning, creative, collaborative learning, intergenerational learning, and self-directed learning. How does AR help with any of those or get in the way?
I'll start. I saw a presentation from the OECD last week that said we're 40 years away from the end of work, which I don't know if it's true or not, but I'll bet you it's not off by 100%, like it's in there. The job market is changing so quickly that the need for boot camp type education throughout your life is going to be enormous. And
What do you mean, the need for boot camp? What does that mean?
that industries are going to come and go. Coding right now is very hot. It's very possible that one of the first things to go would just be rote coding. And all of a sudden, you've got a bunch of really smart people looking for the next thing and becoming data analysts or becoming something else, and or architects. And when you are moving laterally, as the waters are coming up in the job market, I think the need for short, possibly for credit, possibly non-degree programs that allow you to move into the next career, the next job, the next thing, the need for that is going to be enormously higher than it is today.
I agree that there is a need for online or ongoing lifelong learning. We're already seeing in the medical space that groups are wanting to experience training on demand. So they may have learned something a long time ago, but now they have a case coming up and they want to quickly get a refresher on how do I treat this particular kind of case under emergency situations. I also think that there is a lot of learning for careers. There's also just a lot of life learning to develop empathy for different groups of people, ways to open up communication, kind of cross-societally. So there are a lot of different types of learning besides just your academic or just job training, and I think we've already seen a lot of impact from these technologies in some of those areas as well.
Last word?
Yes, to everything that was said. You mean just like last word to sum things up? Yeah. That guy, Neil Postman, a while ago coined that phrase. It's become sort of a cliche of media studies that the medium is the message, right? And, that was like a harsh look. Anyway, not necessarily cliche. But
Marshall McLuhan.
oh gosh, was that? Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed. Regardless, medium is a message. So the question is just...
If your AR glasses were working, you would have...
No, you're right. I'd be like, he was amusing ourselves to death. I got that wrong. But anyway, so it's just, whenever I talk with companies that bring me on as a consultant with AR, that's like the first question that I ask them. And it seems really sort of like high-minded and philosophical. But it's really like what's the message to the learning experience that we want to be bringing with AR or VR too, right? Is this just being used as another content delivery system the way iPads were, the way CD-ROMs, which were going to revolutionize education, were before? Like, is that the message, just like another, maybe a little cooler, chocolate on broccoli way to present content? Or is there like a message of like deeper cognitive engagement where we're really thinking deeply about, as I said at the beginning, how to model the teaching and learning process, how to model the way we as learners figure out how to map our experiences and knowledge onto the world around us.
Actually,
So that's my final.
Last question. John Katzman, who wins? Who's going to be disrupted / loses in this next era?
No professor, no teacher wants to be your TA. A textbook is a toolbox. Nobody starts on page 1 and ends on the last page. So a digital curriculum is not interesting, whether it's AR, VR, or anything else. What's interesting are pieces, are modules. The people who win are the publishers of the future who are publishing libraries of really, really good experiences. A Ken Burns, Civil War module that if you're teaching teaching American history, you're going to plug in that module because it's going to be like by far the best way to get across that information. Some guy who did some interesting supply and demand thing. And those things are measured by how well students learn, not by how cool they are. So the people getting disrupted already are textbook companies, and they're certainly in deep trouble. The people who are getting disrupted are smaller colleges and universities that can't compete and whose economics are deeply troubled as larger schools with better capacity and better tools bubble up in the both financially and in the rankings. And the people who are winning are short modular courses, whether it's General Assembly or the boot camps, short modular pieces of content that can be plugged in a lot of uses.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was your education panel. Thank you.